Namaste everyone. Welcome to today's session of Think India International Relations Forum in collaboration with India China Study Circle, a think tank of students. Our guest today is Mr. Abhijit Iyer Mitra ji. He is a senior research fellow at Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, New Delhi. He is one of the most popular media commentators on national security issues in India. We welcome him and we are very glad that he is here. Thanks for coming to our program, sir. So today's discussion is about India's long-term strategy to catch up with China. We all know that India and China were both at almost similar technological as well as economic pedestals in 1980s. Perhaps India was doing better, but the economic reforms that were adopted by Deng Xiaoping transformed China into world's second largest economy and a upper middle income country, whereas India is still less than one-fifth of Chinese economy, despite being equally populated. The economic reforms in India began in 1991, but the process has not been consistent. If we see, then we can analyze the populists have been voted to power, whereas the economic reformers have been thrown out of the government. Now, today, at the time when we have a stable government at the center, we need to look forward. We need to look into future. So this raises a pertinent question that how can we transform our inconsistent trajectory of inconsistent growth to that of an emerging great power? I would request Abhijit ji to address this issue and further elucidate over the topic. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me here and thanks for coming for this. I'm going to focus on just three major determinants of power, right? And if you look at it, this is, I'm not, Arthashastra ki to baat hi chodo aap. You don't mind if I keep switching between Hindi and English, na? English chalega?
No issues, sir. Bilingual.
Okay. So, let's just focus on our Trinity. Okay? Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. The creator, the preserver, the destroyer. Who are their three mythological wives? Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Durga, Parvati. So, why? Okay, because to create, you need to have knowledge. To preserve, you need to have wealth. And to destroy, you need to have power. Now, in you look at traditionally the way these three wives are depicted. Saraswati is always pure white. Lakshmi is pink. And Durga is in red. Why? Think about it. You know, all of these things, हमारे पूर्वजों ने कुछ सोच समझ के किया था. Why do you think that is? Because when you take a paintbrush, you dip it in red and you draw a line. It will go from red to pink to white. And that has a meaning to it. That for a great power to emerge, it is still a linear process. You can start with having a lot of power, then gain wealth, and then gain education and knowledge. For example, all the Central Asian tribes that came about, they didn't have wealth. They were mostly illiterate, but they were militarily powerful. Then they gained wealth, and finally they gained knowledge. In other cases, you have gained knowledge first, which is, that is what you call social mobility. First, you become educated, the white, then you gain money, Lakshmi, wealth, and then you gain power, Durga, Shakti. That's why she's called Shakti. Okay. So these are the three aspects you need to focus on: education, wealth, and ultimately power. And this is where we don't stack up to China, and I don't see us having a plan to stack up to China. Now, I'm only going to talk for about 15 minutes or so, and after that, we should have Q&A, because I feel it's usually much more interesting to do a two-fro rather than, just give a pointless long monologue on these things. So the first thing, let's look at education. और ये ना हर चीज में, you know, it's fine having slogans, but you should always look at the statistics. अब इसमें आप देखो हर साल, now there have been many people who have dismissed this report, 13 million Indians joining the workforce. Some people say it's exaggerated. Nobody actually comes up with a figure. The least I've heard is about 7 million. Assume it's even 7 million or 13 million. Between those ranges, every year from the 1st to the 12th standards, you have 13 million students, 7 to 13. I'm just going to use 13 as a ballpark. 13 million students. 3 years of a bachelor's degree, another 13 million students per year for 3 years. Or if you want to go in for a trade craft, you know, like carpentry or plumber or something like that, it still requires 4 to 5 years of training. So 13 million there per year. Now, in all of this, if you look at the cumulative budget for it, I'm not even talking about a Western standard, boss. Because here in India, the problem is every mother thinks that her son is Bill Gates, including my own. So, you know, when the day I told my mother I'm going to do my economics, she's like, "Hi Ram, मेरा तो घर बर्बाद हो गया, मेरे पूरा सपना उजड़ गया, मैं क्या करूंगी, मैं जाके नदी में कूद जाऊंगी." You know, all that tamasha that Indian mothers do. I think all of you being young will be very aware of these kind of blackmail tactics that mothers use, that unless you're a doctor or an engineer or something like that, your mother claims that you're a failure in life. ठीक है ना? So if for every mother, her child is Bill Gates. That is fine for a mother. But for a country to think that everybody who has a certificate is the next Bill Gates is an untenable proposition. ठीक है ना? So I am just talking about a factory floor workforce. कि भाई मेरे बेटे को 3 समय की रोटी मिल जाए, उसको एक घर मिल जाए, उसको एक कम से कम एक स्कूटर मिल जाए. Okay, which itself is a huge dream in India right now. You go to rural areas, you know, there is significant poverty, and even basic education, electricity, finally, thanks to, they finally have toilets, they finally have electricity. But even these things are luxuries. Now you just budget the cost of what we're talking about in terms of education. Minimum you need to educate a child to a factory floor workforce level is 70,000 a year. So approximately $1,000. Uske baad, for your secondary education, which is to say either your college or your trade education, you need to spend at least $10,000 per kid, even a carpenter or a plumber. Because remember, carpentry and plumbing, unless you have destroyed a few toilets, you have destroyed a few chairs and things like that, they are actually very expensive courses. In India, we don't spend that kind of money. But there are lots of studies done which show you that you need at least about $10,000 per person. In America, it is much more. In Germany, on trade education, they spend something like 36 to 40,000 at the entry level. Usually, if you're going to become a automotive engineer on the Audi factory floor, mind you, it is a floor job. It isn't a desk job. You're still spending about 50,000 euros per year on your training. Okay, so just that secondary training requires about $10,000. Iska cumulative budget kya hai? So 15 years of education, 13 million people per year, you're looking at a budget of between 550 to 600 billion. Not M, nahi billion dollars. हम कितना spend करते हैं? Now this is for 13. Assume it's 7, you bring it down to half, you're still looking at $250 billion. What is your this thing then? How much are you spending right now though? $20 billion cumulatively. Out of which between 8 to 12, I'm seeing different figures for this. 8 to 12 billion is spent by that top 0.2% or whatever in sending their kids abroad. So we're only spending between the remaining 8 to 12 billion, depending on the figure, is what you're spending on per child in India today. You tell me, where is the means of becoming an educated society to catch up with China? Now, there are ways of overcoming this, okay, which is to be like China and say, Dekho bhai, we can't spend money on everybody. We are only going to spend money on the Eastern Seaboard, which is Beijing में, Shanghai में, so Tianjin, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangdong, you will all get excellent education. बाकी के लोगों को कुछ नहीं मिलेगा. Once these guys make money, then we will start pushing the money more and more west, which is why you see now in the final stages of China's development, China is industrializing Xinjiang, and they're also, they're modernizing Tibet. They're not industrializing Tibet, they claim, because, industrialization requires water. It's a population boom and it requires water. And they're claiming that they're not doing that in order to maintain upper riparian parity with all the lower riparian states for the rivers that originate in the Himalayas. But even to achieve that, where is your budgetary allocation for the rest of the money? Are you even able to do what? Can you say, for example, we will only provide top-notch education to people in Delhi, Bombay, Madras, Calcutta? You can't. You will lose the next election. So you're not able to do that. The other, so this is called regional apartheid. The other is genuine apartheid, which is what South Africa does or did. कि भाई इन्हीं लोगों को एजुकेशन मिलेगा, बाकी लोगों को बहुत कम सस्ता दाम, because they maintain two parallel economies. The black economy there for the black persons and the colored persons was a very rudimentary third world kind of education, whereas the economy for the whites, they had services like as good, if not better than Europe at one point of time. Now it's a different story. It's also one of the lessons of socialism, of spreading your money thin, which is what the ANC did when they came to power. So you can't implement either of these models. So we first need to think कि भाई Saraswati education कहाँ से मिल रहा है. The second way of doing it was to become a baniya state and make lots of money, at which point you can then spend it on education. ठीक है ना? Now, we avoided that path completely by all our socialism as soon as we became independent. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is we're continuing down that socialism. And mind you, socialism is the most un-Hindu, un-Indic thing to do. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, okay. So, sorry, like I said, I have some internet problems happening. So, Arthashastra mein, you can claim that this is a pre-industrial society. And there is archaeological evidence to show that that period of Ashoka reigning himself was a particularly bad economic period. That period of 38 years was a particularly bad economic period because the archaeological record would show you significantly greater wealth before and after. Very curiously, I'll come to that later. So, what you have now is, during the Arthashastra period, it was very, very clear. Chanakya was very clear. We will take 16% of your income. The only thing we will provide you with is security. Security, excellent regulatory mechanisms, excellent judges and things like that. बाकी का तुम करो, हम तो infrastructure पे भी पैसा नहीं देंगे. If you see the need, that there is a need for a bridge, you build the bridge. The only agreement is the military gets to use it when it wants for free. बाकी तुमको जितना उस पे road tax लगाना है, bridge tax लगाना है, तुम लगाओ. There will be no Supreme Court saying this toll plaza cannot charge this much money, or this toll plaza needs to let VIPs and anybody with blue plate or lal batti to go through for free and all of that. Kuch nahi tha. Only army was allowed to use it for free. You had all of that. That is actually the ideal capitalist state. Today, you don't even have that. Okay, your demonetization wiped out most of your it wipe out. It hurt very badly, hurt the micro, medium and small sectors. And then they also have to pick up the compliance of GST as well, which has turned into a massive extortion scheme. Why? Because you haven't adjusted administrative power. Now, mind you, both demonetization and GST were actually pretty good for the economy, theoretically speaking. The problem always comes in practice in India. Like Indian communists, the reason Indian communists were never meant to win power, never managed to win power, is they're very good at theory. like Lenin used to say, you know, every idea is worth 1,000 pages of theory. You come up with one idea, which is to say Shubham's wall is yellow. The communist will look at it and say, bhai, this is a theoretical construct. This man is a sanghi, this thing, Brahmin, patriarch, la-di-da-di-da, wearing blue, so it shows the superiority of the capitalist. Blue over the sanghi, it shows the commercialization of sanghi values. ऐसे हजार पेज का वो एक PhD thesis ही लिख देगा based on that one photo of him having a yellow wall behind him and a blue shirt wearing. But when it comes to cutting and pasting on India, you know, he wanted communist revolution.
Yes, sir. Now you're audible.
Okay, ठीक है. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so internet problems. I apologize. ये पता नहीं क्यों WebEx में होता है. अच्छा. Sorry, where was I? Yeah. So they meet Stalin, and Stalin tells them कि भाई तुम लोग कितने हो? ये मैप देखो हिंदुस्तान का कितना बड़ा है. Do you know how many revolutionaries we needed to take control of Russia? Do you know how many revolutionaries we needed to take control of China? Then what are you giving me all these empty lectures for? And he shut down this whole revolution in India even before it had started, because he realized that Indian communists were too stupid to do anything realistic. He genuinely said that. This is a documented meeting, incidentally. Right? So we're wonderful at this cut and paste. The problem is when you paste, it doesn't work. You know, it's like cutting and pasting something from Japanese into an English language document. उसमें पता नहीं formatting का भी क्या हो जाता है, and then the person reading it can't understand. This is what happens with a lot of our economic planning out here. All right, we're unable to contextualize it to the Indian situation, and a lot of it has to do with our own policy loops that we create, right? Mostly because we don't accumulate data. At the last place I worked, ORF, we bought data from 30 different government departments. Okay, and the kind of data, this was the kind of data that companies would have given an arm and a leg for. Because it wasn't 2,000 houses, 3,000 houses. It was something like 5 lakh households across the width and breadth of the country. The problem was it had all been accumulated in different formats. There was no consistency in the questioning. 30 different departments had mostly duplicated each other's work and spent a heck of a lot of government money doing it. So there was no centralized data collection and things like that. Which is why even today, any researcher in India finds a huge problem actually giving you proper statistics, because the statistics are impossible to come by. So what do you actually use in your modeling? Right? So this becomes a huge issue. So your economic plans fundamentally aren't working out. Now look at the way the nature of the economy itself has changed. Once upon a time in America and in Europe, it was, you know, Mercedes used to manufacture about 60 to 70% of the Mercedes car in-house. Lockheed Martin used to manufacture about 60 to 70% of its planes in-house. Today, you're lucky if they manufacture between 15 to 20% in-house. ठीक है ना? Everything comes from a different place and it only gets assembled out there. Now, this has been the biggest driver of your information revolution. Why? That instead of big industry being your determinant of technological growth, it is actually your micro and small that determine technological growth. Because each thing, remember, a great victory is the sum total of lots of small victories. That is why great technology leaps are in fact the sum total of small technology leaps that are happening across the micro and small sector, which then come together in a beautifully molded this thing. For example, an Apple phone, a Samsung phone, an Apple computer, anything like that, each component, the advance it represents, one company can't invest in every single part of it because every single part has become hyper specialized. This was a model that was suited to India to grow. You didn't have the money to spend on big industry, great. Unshackle your small industry and your micro sector, allow them to grow if they want to. Here, the problem is even when somebody wants to scale up, the regulatory and compliance costs become so much that nobody wants to scale up. And this is why Bangladesh has overtaken us in terms of textiles and ceramics. They're focused on only two things, textiles and ceramics. But in that, they have left us behind so badly, it's not even funny. So there is the sort of economics that we've been following, this approach, too much regulation, ki bhai har saal ye cess, tax, cess, and there's one more thing I forget now, I'm sorry. It just keeps changing. And people, supply chains are determined years ahead. If there is price variability out there, you destroy the guys, the suppliers' competitiveness in the international market. So, many people were telling me that there was an MP from Punjab who was telling me ki, sir, aap to ye dekho ki, in China, all private companies get subsidized to make them more competitive. It happens in America also, in one way or another. In India, there is exactly zero subsidy for them. So what do? They steal electricity. They assume that that is their subsidy. So electricity theft is actually used by industry as a subsidy. Releasing polluted water without treatment and things like that is also a subsidy because they don't want to spend that extra money. And so they're happier bribing off the guy who comes to inspect because that is less of an expense for them than all the regulatory burden that you're forced down on them. And then, of course, there is absolute no enforcement of contracts in this country. The government will not pay you. I've been working with lots of energy companies in the South. They have thousands of crores worth of outstanding of electricity dues that they've not been paid. And it is, and mind you, it's the government not paying it. And they want that everything adjudicated. If you stop supplying them with electricity, they'll throw you in jail. Okay? So there's lots of these things that have been happening that you really need to get a hang of, which are not happening. And much of it has to do with the current government's micromanagement. I've seen this with several ministers. What happens is their bureaucrats bog them down in micro detail. And as any good management person will tell you, micromanagement is always a formula for disaster. You are getting into details you don't need to get into. All you need to tell him is, I want this by this date. Baki ka mere ko, please don't bother me with all the micro details. That is not happening. And second is even the people that are giving you that advice aren't specialists. Today in the modern world, the kind of hyper specialization that everybody brings in is just a completely different level. I'm sorry, मैं बोला 15 मिनट के लिए बोलूंगा, मैंने अभी तक 30 मिनट का बकबक करके रखा है तुम लोगों का. Very very sorry. अब 5 मिनट में मैं खत्म कर दूंगा, ठीक है ना? And so finally what happens is ये जो we then come to defense in all of this. Now, when your education is bad, your wealth creation is bad, your defense is positively dysfunctional, beyond belief. Okay? The standard responses, arms lobbies have kept us back. People are scared of India. That is why they don't want India to progress. Haan bhai, after World War II, they allowed Germany and Japan to progress. They allowed South Korea to progress. They allowed Taiwan to progress. They allowed Turkey to progress. They allowed Spain to progress. They allowed Italy to progress. All their enemies were allowed to progress. But India was such a great threat that it was not allowed to progress either by the Soviets or ये लोग ना ये एक दूसरे से डरते नहीं है, वो हिंदुस्तान से डरते हैं. अमेरिका ना चाइना को देख के ये फ्लीट नहीं बना रहा है, न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स नहीं बना रहा है, हिंदुस्तान को देख के बना रहा है. इसीलिए वो इंडिया को डेवलप नहीं करने देंगे. ये लॉकहीड मार्टिन के लॉबीइस्ट, बोइंग के लॉबीइस्ट हमको षड्यंत्र में ये कर रहे हैं. भाई अपनी औकात देखिए. जब पाकिस्तान आके मेरे को ये बोलता है ना कि तुम हिंदू लोग तुम हमारे को ये कर रहे हो, वो कर रहे हो, हमको ये, आई एम लाइक भाई देख अपनी औकात तो समझ ले. मैं कहां हूं, तू कहां है? But this is how Indians talk to the rest of the world. So understand, I want you to introspect a bit and think about how you think of Pakistan. Other than the terrorism support, Usko chodo. That is how China thinks of India. That is how America thinks of India as well. Because that is the power differential out there. Are you fixing any of these? No. And don't even get me down to defense, because that is such a cesspit. When your education is bad, when your economy is bad, imagine how bad your defense is going to be. And yet, I have heard Air Force chiefs, army chiefs, ministers come out and say, Dekho, humko, we are technologically so advanced. The Americans actually want to buy technology from us, boss. इसीलिए ये सुन सुनकर ही मैं गंजा हूं. ये दिखाई दे रहा है आपको? ये, this is why I've become ganju. So there is a fundamental divorce from reality. And I'm pricking your ego, and I'm doing it deliberately. I want to hurt you because in the hope that you will understand how grave and serious the situation is. Not only do we not have a plan to catch up, the water, we are drowning and the water is already here. We need to get out of this situation. And right now, the way I'm seeing it, there is no way of getting out of the situation unless you implement measures today. ये incrementalism नहीं चलेगा. ठीक है ना? So do we have a plan to catch up? I can go into lots of things in the Q&A. The foreign service, for example, 700. It is now reduced to 600 people, which is smaller than the bureaucracy of Singapore. Singapore, which is the size of my hometown of Madras, it is actually smaller than Madras, has more diplomats than the Republic of India with 1.3 billion people. They have diplomatic representations, better diplomatic representations in most countries. And your diplomats, incidentally, don't even know how to carry out. First of all, they're not handed over contacts. Anyway, I don't want to get into the micro details. I wanted to keep this macro. So Q&A, maybe we can discuss the micro. So I will stop here. And we can do a Q&A as much as you want.
Thank you, Abhijit. I would like to ask a question regarding the mindset. Do you think there has been like a changing mindset after 1991, or at least we read that before 1991 there was this 5-year plans and industrialization and self-reliance and all that going on. And after 1991, after we opened up, the industrialization should have increased more, and the private sector should have been more active and all that, but it hasn't happened. So is it like the societal mindset, or is it the responsibility of the political leadership after 1991?
All societal response comes in response to politics. Right. I think there has been study after study after study that has shown that real change is never grassroots. It is actually the results. What we call grassroots change is actually the result of deliberate or unthinking political actions by the top leadership. So what we had was Narasimha Rao definitely changed a lot, right? And from 1991 onwards, especially during the third front governments, you saw significant economic growth to the point where when Vajpayee takes over, money actually becomes a good word, right? Being rich is seen as a good thing. So under Vajpayee, both under the third front before that and then Vajpayee after that, there was a blossoming of the economy. So many people became rich. India, for the first time in its history, went from being a largely rural country to a largely urban country. Of course, the statistics won't show you. They'll still claim it's 65% urban. That's rubbish. When you go into the urban statistics, you'll know. Because, a lot of urban areas are hidden as rural areas. They're called peri-urban, and slums are still called slums. Urban slums are still called villages and things like that. But we actually became an urban society. Now, the issue in all of this was that somewhere in 2006, 7, 8, because of all the corruption that we saw, which came to light, UPA 1's corruption only came to light in UPA 2. Money has now become a dirty word, to the point where the so-called leader of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi, he's not the leader of the opposition, but he's the de facto leader of the opposition. यही इस देश की ये है ना कि इसको आके लीडर ऑफ द ऑपोजिशन बनाए तो तुम्हारा देश ही कैसा देश होगा। तो उसको वो बंदा बोलता है हर चीज के लिए सूट बूट का सरकार। बट दैट इज नॉट द प्रॉब्लम। The problem is your government is so scared of that accusation of सूट बूट का सरकार that it has paralyzed everything. You don't want, see, at least you don't want to help people, ठीक है, तुम्हारे पास पैसा नहीं है, ठीक है, at least let them help themselves. Deregulate the education market, deregulate the economy, वो भी तुम नहीं करोगे. So you want to control everybody, but then you don't want to deliver. You tell me, how are you going to distribute? See, if there are 30 people in the house, you can't feed them with one pizza. You have to think about baking more pizzas or increasing the size of the pizza. वो करने के लिए तैयार नहीं है. We are a pro-poor government. What does a pro-poor government mean, yaar? How can you actually go to the people and say, I am pro-poor? I'm not going to make you rich, but I'm going to ensure you live a life of dignity being poor. But this is what happens here. So you have all these things happening where it's a sociological aversion now. We've gone back to the Nehruvian period, where we have this aversion to industry, to business, to wealth, to profit.
Maybe I can ask another question quickly. This is basically as the situation is right now, it will be very difficult for India to really catch up with China for a long time. And China is becoming very active in our neighborhood, trying to expand into the Indian Ocean and other neighboring countries. So how can we really, counter the influence of China in our neighborhood?
Okay, so there's two things to do. One is, countering the influence of China. How? One is to prevent its military incursions into the Indian Ocean region. And second is, working with governments to reduce their economic imprint in those countries. So the first thing that we can do, let me deal with the second part first, the economic influence. So one thing that we can't do with China is compete with China because they've got so much more money than we do. They can just afford to burn money. So we can't compete with that right now. Okay, na? But what we can do is, one thing we're very good at is that you may have socialists and the worst economists who have not been able to remove India from being a third world country in 70 years, but we're very good at exporting rotten economists. Okay, so you look at people like Kaushik Basu and things like that, they will preach socialism and poverty politics in India, but they themselves will go to World Bank and earn multi-million-dollar salaries and things like that. So इसमें क्या होता है कि you start exporting your economists to this country, make them realize the risks of Chinese investment. Okay, use your soft power because everybody trusts Indian economists for whatever reason. I don't know why. I mean, I wouldn't trust would Mukesh Ambani trust a beggar coming in? Imagine Mukesh Ambani is driving in his Rolls Royce and some bhikari comes to him and says, "Hey, Baba, खोल ना, ठीक है, क्या है? Hey, मेरे को पैसा दे, मैं तेरे को investment advice देगा." Would you give money to that bhikari? नहीं. But then, for some reason, India is like that bhikari coming and saying, "Hey, मैं तेरे को advice देता है रे, खिड़की नीचे कर." ठीक है, but as long as they are willing to be made buddhus out of, send your economic advisors there, at least make them realize the costs of Chinese so-called investment, because these are predatory investments. They get them into debt traps. And if they get into those debt traps, send your economists to teach them how to nix those debt traps. Because, in this day and age, you can't go invade a country because it has defaulted on its debts like you could during the colonial period. Like Argentina, you can just say, I'm repudiating all the debts. There's nothing you can do about it. End of story. Right? So this is one way of countering Chinese influence that way. The third way, which is the diplomatic way, hamari to aukat nahi hai, like I said, with such a small bureaucracy and an inability to deliver on projects. Hamban Tota that we're so worried about where Chinese nuclear submarines are coming, it was first offered to India to develop. South Bloc said no. North Bloc said paisa nahi hai. And so it was Govinda. ठीक है ना? उसके बाद ही the Chinese have come there and now they've built a nuclear submarine base at your very doorstep out there. So with the diplomatic angle, nothing to talk about. From the military angle, our biggest advantage is that China is still a middle income country with the quality of products that only a lower middle income country can manufacture. Why a lower middle income? Because to become a high middle income, they're stuck in an income trap. To truly transition to the information age, you need to democratize. They've not been able to do that. They will not do that because for them, their political survival is more important. Other examples of this are North Korea. You know, North Korea was the success story. South Korea was the failure. Till 1979, North Korea had the second highest per capita income in Asia after Japan. Okay, North Korea was seen as the developed Korea. But they chose to de-industrialize for the sake of their ideology and preserving the regime. China is like that. It is not going to transition into the high income, even lower high income. It will not transition into. Please make a video recording of this. And if I'm wrong 10 years down the line, please find me and beat me with your chappals or shoes or whatever it is you have. Come and beat me very good with it. But I will stake my reputation on this. China will not become a high income economy. So what happens there is, our biggest differential is that we can buy Western equipment, which is far, far, far more sophisticated than anything China has or China will have in the future. The problem with that Western equipment is it is very, very, very expensive. These are quality solutions. They are not quantity solutions. So first of all, you need to think through things like, bhai, humko kitne chahiye? Second, you need to build economies of scale. You can't afford to have contracts for 666 submarines every 10 years and not build up economies of scale that you can't indigenize anything. Right? So if you do that, an aero-naval expansion is a fantastic way of limiting their ability using what few advantages you have against them. The problem is even there, we are not spending our money properly. है भिखारी, behave करते हैं मुकेश अंबानी की तरह.
Next, I'd request Amit Gupta to ask his question.
Abhijit, thank you very much for the wonderful talk. My question, you referred towards the small industry and the micro industries. I will come specifically towards that because that is my question is related with the defense production. Because if we want to catch up with China, then defense production, indigenous defense production, I think becomes a major area where we need to catch up with them for a long term. If the war stretches longer, maybe around a couple of months, then we need to have indigenous defense production. Recently, there was a news report, and I think it has been finalized that India is buying around 400 Athos artillery guns from Israel. Now, I am wondering because just a few days, I think about a year ago, the defense imports were banned and there were about 150 items. Today, we have 3 indigenous artillery guns from private sector, 2 from private sector and 1 from the Ordnance Factory Board. So why are we ordering these imported artillery guns? I mean, is there a quality problem or what is the issue or why it's imported?
So I can tell you the OFB gun isn't a very good gun because they have huge issues with their metallurgy. But the Tata gun and the Kalyani gun are very good guns. ठीक है ना? जो उसमें छोटे-छोटे problems हैं, you can easily overcome them. But this is the problem where, you know, we talk and there is a huge difference between what we say and what we do. Now, assume that even the Tata and the Kalyani guns were bad. When you made your initial purchase of lightweight howitzers, the M777 from America about 6-7 years back, what prevented you? And you know that production line was shutting down. What prevented you from taking the technology and building a self-propelled howitzer, that is a towed howitzer? What prevented you from putting it onto a tracked chassis and a wheeled chassis and developing variants of it? The Americans were telling us, why don't you take the production line off of us? We'll give it to you. This is not like an engine where the technology is so sensitive that we don't want to share it with you. We're willing to give this to you. Okay? Then you go and buy a Korean self-propelled tracked howitzer. Then you buy an Israeli wheeled howitzer. The question is, where is the punishment for all of this? Because see, this is corruption. This is actually corruption masquerading around as incompetence. But tell me one newspaper or one defense correspondent willing to go to the army chief and say, Bhai, tu pagal ho gaya kya? You didn't want the technology for that. You want 300 of this, 300 of that, 300 of that. Tumhara kahan se indigenize hoga defense production? And then you are ignoring whatever is domestically produced. To kahan se hoga? You know, when you accept indigenization, you accept a lower quality of product initially, and it will slowly start getting better and better and better and better. Israeli missiles initially, the Israeli pilots were actually really scared of them. They used to prefer to go in for gunfights in the air rather than shoot their missiles, because in 3-4 cases, the missiles came and tracked onto their own heat signatures and blew them up. But today, Israeli missiles are world beaters. So, you know, you have to invest. It's like a child. You invest in a child for the first 20-25 years of their life, but you don't want to invest in industry for the first 20-25 years of their life, handhold them. अरे जब बच्चा गिरता है तब भी तुम बोलते हो ना, जब बच्चे को वॉकिंग सिखा रहे हो, जब बच्चा गिरता है तब भी तुम बोलते गुड बॉय. ये तो नहीं बोलते हो सारे हट चल फुट घर से निकल, मैं तेरा रास्ते पे जा, तू अनाथ है, मैं तेरा ये नहीं कर रहा हूं. हम ये सेंटिमेंटल मूवीज बनाने में बहुत अच्छे हैं, बट imbibing those same lessons into our own life and treating our industry that way, we don't want to do that. So it is a mixture of a lot of things: incompetence, corruption, stupidity, economic illiteracy, all of it combined.
Just to follow up briefly on that, I mean, if we talk the quality, I mean, certainly we have most of the equipments imported from West and earlier from the Soviet Union, so they are superior to what the Chinese inventory has. But even if we see our adversary, I mean, our adversary is China, and if we just focus too much upon quality and having superior equipments, then I mean, isn't it like an imbalance that our adversary is just relying on quantity and we are too much focusing on quality?
So this is the beauty of it, because remember, even in the West, you have what is called the high-low combination. High is high-end weaponry, low is low-end weaponry, which is much cheaper, and it brings great quality in great quantity.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, like, you know, a Microsoft, for example, an iMac would cost you something like 2-3 lakhs if you spec it out completely. If you get the entry-level version, you can get it for about 1 lakh or so.
Yeah.
ठीक है ना? So इसमें भी speccing का options है तुम्हारा. And even that entry level will still be far superior to the Xiaomi, 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 whatever जो उधर से आ रहा है. ठीक है ना? You don't even want to do that. So instead, say, assume you're operating a fleet of cars. You're buying from the West. You have multiple options. You can either go in for 10 Rolls Royces, or you can go in for 100 Audis. The Audi will still be better than your Chinese Geelong or MG Hector or whatever. But you don't want the 100 Audis. You want the 10 Rolls Royces. So क्या करोगे? So even quantity solutions they have, which are much higher quality than China. The problem is we don't settle for that. Even today, you look at it. We were meant to replace the MiG-21. It was meant to be a single engine fighter. You chose to buy the second heavy fighter, Rafale, after you already have a heavy fighter called the Sukhoi, instead of going in for mass purchases of a light single engine fighter like, say, the F-16 or the Gripen. And half the problem was your DRDO saying, नहीं sir, तेजस अगला साल आ जाएगा, अगला साल आ जाएगा, अगला साल आ जाएगा. 20 साल से अगला साल चला आ रहा है. You know, there's that musical called Annie, and there's that famous song in it. Tomorrow, it's always a day away. It's like that. Tomorrow, it's always a day away. It's like a nuclear program. The 3-stage nuclear program was meant to have been activated 20 years back. We're still not even operationalized, commercialized the very first iteration of that. You look at the Hindu, I want you to look at the Hindu, run a Google search for the Hindu domestic nuclear reactor. Since 2006, the AEC has been saying it's going to come online next year. पिछले 15 साल से ये तमाशा चले आ रहा है next year का. 15 साल से कुछ भी नहीं हुआ है. अरे 15 साल में you finished an entire development cycle in the West and come up with a completely new design of reactor. इधर एक reactor में we're stalled. And see, this is what I'm saying. When the PMO is so hell-bent on micromanaging everything, you can't take a macro view of things. In China, it's actually the reverse problem. That they are under, the state companies under so much pressure to commercialize and produce something operational every 2 years. They do ghotala inside and they produce all kinds of cheap crap, which aren't really, outwardly they look different. Internally, they're the exact same thing. They misfunction very badly. But then उन्होंने अपना कोटा टिक कर दिया. हर 2 साल हमने एक नया टैंक प्रोड्यूस किया या नया प्लेन प्रोड्यूस कर दिया. Like the stealth fighter, it has massive problems. It is incapable of combat. Right, but they have to produce it, otherwise God knows which chief engineer will be taken out and executed by firing squad out there. So China is the opposite. China is too much pressure to commercialize. India is too little pressure to commercialize or accountability.
Now I would request Kota sir to have his question.
Thanks for the wonderful presentation, Abhijit. My question is regarding the innovation versus imitation. India has followed the policies of imitation of China, whether it is SEZ, special economic zones, or Make in India, or even in tourism. You have incredible India versus amazing China like concepts. So this kind of imitation has not worked in India for a longer duration. Especially our SEZs are not performing like the Chinese SEZ. They have just 4 SEZs. We had around 1,000 SEZs in the UPA era. So how do you see this innovation versus imitation in Indian system, which can be the solution to catch up with China? Because if we don't innovate, we don't grow. And to innovate, we need a support system, which I think in a democratic society like India, innovation is possible, which is not possible in a society like China, where you don't have the freedom to innovate, especially.
So I would disagree with this thing that I don't see it as innovation versus imitation. You start by imitating, ultimately you innovate. Remember Japan, when Japan first started producing cars, they were cheap copies. The innovation started only in the 60s. When Germany started off on its quest to become technologically developed in the early stages, when Bismarck started this focus on quality, German products were considered absolute rubbish. They were considered like Korean products were once upon a time. You remember, I mean, Korean products, we have seen their transformation only in the last 20 years. I remember when Daewoo and Hyundai first came into the market, they'll be like, "Chhi, Hyundai खरीदा है तू, ये कैसे लोग हैं?" अब तो Hyundai सभी लेते हैं भाई. Everybody wants a Creta. Today Hyundai has become aspirational. Right? Tata is getting there. Pehले it used to be ये क्या truck खरीद के रखा है. Now they've actually become quite desirable. They've not finessed it yet. It will take them another 10 years to finesse, but they'll finesse it. So imitation is the first stage of innovation. It is not imitation versus innovation. The problem is this cut-paste policy. 1000 SEZ क्यों खोले? एक खोलना था ना. हमको पायलट प्रोजेक्ट मतलब क्या है समझ में भी नहीं आता है. SEZ खोलो तो 1000 खोलो. स्मार्ट सिटी करो. you've got a 1,000 crore budget for smart cities, or a 10,000 or 1 lakh crore, ऐसे कुछ था, ridiculous budget for smart cities, but then you wanted 100 smart cities, which means everybody gets only 100 crores, which means you have just enough to put baskets in every street corner, so that people, instead of spitting their pan on the bus, on the wall, on the street, they do through in the basket. और वो भी नहीं करेंगे, सामने basket पड़ा भी होगा ना. Smart cities are made by smart people. Cities don't become smart. वो अगर तुम्हारे आगे ये पड़ा भी होगा, फिर भी लेके वो दीवार पर ही करेंगे या बस पे करेंगे, थूकना. So this is a cut and paste problem. It is not an innovation versus imitation problem, and innovation versus imitation is never a problem. I do have no issues with imitation. Look at our pharma sector. It grew on the basis of generics, which was copying other people's IPR. And where are we today? We're in a very good place today. Right? So go by what the pharma sector did. Imitate, imitate, imitate. Copy, copy, copy. Steal IPR. No problem. But then allow the sector to grow. वो भी हम करते नहीं है. SEZ करोगे तो 1000 SEZ करोगे. You know what the problem with those SEZs was? Where was the electricity coming from? Where was the trained labor coming from? What were the labor practices to be handled or held out there? उसमें तो कोई clarity नहीं था. Everyone was different. So there was no attraction to coming there. What happens when an industrial dispute happens out there? Because India has rejected between the last 15, it wasn't 7. People are saying it's the last 7 arbitrations. India has rejected the last 15 arbitrations. तो फिर SEZ खोलने में, what are you going to achieve, boss? It is not that you have imitated. It is that you have imitated badly. बंदर बनना है तो जी जान से बंदर बनो. ठीक है? अगर बंदर बनना है, win an Oscar for your bandering. Don't act like Swara Bhaskar, who can't even act.
Next we have Abhijit here.
Sir, am I audible to you?
हाँ हाँ हाँ, बोलो 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 अभी.
Okay. Sir, my question is related to the China's involvement in the military coup in Myanmar. So India was silent. On the other hand, there was reports like China is involved in that, and India is acting that India wants to be a leader of South Asia, but they are not claiming anything.
Okay, Aviral, sorry, just to cut you short, the assumption itself is wrong. There has been zero Chinese there. If anything, Burma has shown Asia how to deal with China since the 1950s. They are the only country in Asia that has known how to deal with China since 1950. Burma is pro-Burma. There is zero Chinese influence out there. They know how to use China. They know how to extract exactly what they want from China, and India should keep absolutely quiet. Aviral, please stop reading Western shit. I would really urge you, stop reading Western shit. There is I appreciate Western journalism up to a point, but after a point, it becomes absolute gobbledygook. Okay? India should do absolutely nothing, because Burma is the one country that has managed to keep Chinese influence out. We should keep absolutely quiet, and if you can't keep quiet, then support them and applaud them. The last thing we need is interfering in the affairs of another country, no matter how much you don't like that country, and creating another Chinese stooge out there because they feel they've got no other option. Okay, so it's simply not true. Do you remember in 2014, 2015, they gave $100 billion, no, not 100, I think it was $20-30 billion Northern Dam project to the Chinese. They cancelled it overnight and kicked the Chinese out, boss. क्या बात कर रहे हो Chinese influence?
Sir, I have one more question. Can I ask?
पूछो पूछो.
Sir, after the post-Quad summit this year, India, Japan, and Australia, they launched their SCRI. And after the halting of the EU-China investment deal, there is sort of a very favorable situation for India. So do you think that the current policy regime that we have is able to tap this potential
Kuch nahi. You heard my speech. Now, what have we been talking about for the last 1 hour? We are Govinda. We'll keep saying Govinda, Govinda. We can't deliver. Bas. Kuch nahi hone wala. You will see a lot of these initiatives. This won't be the first initiative. This won't be the last. There will be nothing that will come out of it.
Next, we
Thank
have
you, sir.
Mrigang here. Mrigang, please go ahead with the question.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Pucho.
Sir, I have a little bit of a confusion here. You said incrementalism is sort of a negative thing, especially in our overall, if you see in our policy making. But if we see, even if you consider that, there must be some positive effects of it. If I say so, because, for example, if you see a submarine program, for example, the P-75I has been stalling on for 20 years plus, more than that. But somehow our nuclear program in the submarine sector has been going well. Particularly people, according to reports, it's because of micromanagement, specifically under supervision of PMO. So in this regard also, for example, in the aero manufacturing sector, what as far as you have also suggested, and I agree, that Tejas program has been failure in scale, right? Because it took almost 20 years plus, and because of all the Congress rule and stuff. But however, they have started improving and imitating. They have started imitating the Mirage. They have gone to certain point, and now they have started involving a private consortium to develop various core components. For example, in the sensitive category, they have last time with Boris Johnson, they have made a deal with Rolls-Royce, and they have agreed transfer of IPR for engine manufacturing for both.
They have not. So here is the first.
Yeah,
issue.
I wanted to know what is the truth behind it.
All of this is complete nonsense. I'll tell you why. That Rolls-Royce deal fell through. जो Rolls-Royce इंडिया का ये अफवाह फैलाते हैं, and the problem with defense reporters is because they depend on access to the PRO for their handouts and their freebies and their trips on the Vikrant or Vikramaditya or whatever. They have to chapify whatever bullshit these people put out. And because Rolls-Royce wants future business prospects in India, they also have to do yes, it's true. You are not getting squat from Rolls-Royce right now.
Okay.
You are not getting
sir, in that.
There was a proposal. Wait, I haven't finished. So it is not happening. Second, with your Tejas as well, what you have done is you've started procuring a lot of subsystems and things like that from abroad, which should have been done from day one. You are now doing it, TK. Congratulations. Now that it's finally going through, TK. It's going to get shot down in droves. You have to accept that because it's the first iteration of the aircraft. Maybe the second iteration and things will be better. I hope this doesn't go the Maruth way, where you created an aircraft and then you stopped creating that aircraft and you didn't develop that aircraft. ठीक है ना? तो देखते हैं. The submarine program also, remember, its development, because it was focused directly by the Prime Minister, one project, it did reasonably well. Reasonably, not entirely. I'll tell you why. First, it's a Russian multi-hull. The moment the French, it has been stated policy of the Navy to go in for single hull designs. The very moment the French had said in 2008 कि भाई France accepts India's exception to the NPT as absolute, including in reprocessing, the French were lobbying very hard, saying कि भाई you buy up 50% of Areva. Areva will be a joint Indian-French company, and we will transfer that nuclear technology and things to you. You buy our conventional submarines. You should have bought 24 conventional submarines then of the same design, and which case you create economies of scale. First, you bought 6 Scorpions. Now you've set another thing for another 6 different submarines, all corrupt, by the way. Scorpions, there was open corruption. We all know about it. Your current thing also is complete hogwash. They want a VLS tube in a submarine that doesn't have the girth for it. So it has to be redesigned completely around it. Okay, so it has not been properly managed as well. So even there, It has speeded up things, but it has not been well managed. Your first hull you failed to construct. It had to be given to Larsen and Toubro to construct it. And after they constructed it, instead of rewarding it, you force them to hand over the technology to your shipyard so that they can now construct it even though they've not done any hard work. So you actually showed L&T that if you deliver, you will be screwed over. Far from it. Far from it. Though I will accept the nuclear submarine program has been somewhat, marginally better managed.
We are already running out of time.
सुनो मेरा प्लीज मिस्टर डे मेरा कांटेक्ट डिटेल्स ले लेना 10 साल में अगर रोल्स रॉयस इंजन डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्शन नहीं हुआ ना you will be buying me a BMW का sedan. I want everybody, this is a verbal contract, I want this recording to be made. अगर 10 साल में Rolls Royce engine isn't this one, Mr. Day will be buying me a BMW. Actually, please don't buy me a BMW. Please don't buy German cars. German cars are shit. They're unreliable crap. Please don't buy them. You will buy me the top range Toyota in this country at that point of time.
If we have time, so we can take some questions from the audience as well. So there is one question. Divyanshi is asking, what should be India's policy in terms of Tibet?
In terms of
Tibet.
By Tibet पे कुछ है ही नहीं. Tibet is gone. You forget Tibet. I have been to Tibet. Have you been to Tibet? मैं घूम के remote areas of Tibet में घूम के आया हूँ. It has been completely integrated. Their culture has been wiped out. You have no chance out there. Xinjiang, you may still have chances. The issue is, are you ready to have an Islamic Emirate or Caliphate out there, which will then become the next terror hub if you give it independence? ठीक है ना? So you forget about Tibet. Tibet में कुछ नहीं होगा. Okay, Tibet is not leaving China. They have succeeded. This is what China has done historically. It has been 2,500 years of undiluted policy to forcibly homogenize populations. The Tibetans have resisted magnificently, but they are never going to get independent again. Let's be clear about this. Because even if they get independent again, the rate of intermarriage with Chinese and the sinification of Tibet is now complete.
One which I have received personally is the outcome of China's 7 census reveals that it may get old before it gets rich. And India has one of the youngest populations of the world. So what policy reforms can India adopt to achieve the goal of demographic dividend to facilitate national development?
You do not have a demographic dividend. What you're looking at is a demographic nightmare. Stop calling it a demographic dividend. A dividend hota if you had invested in education early on, if you had set your education policy right early on. Right now, you have neither got your economy under control nor your education under control. You are effectively, what you are calling a demographic dividend is going to be highly sexualized, highly violent people without jobs. Look at the gender ratio disparity. That entire gender ratio disparity, 930 is to 1,000 or whatever it is, that's 70 per 1,000 men that you're looking at. The overlay there of being without jobs and being without a proper education, you're looking at an extraordinary spurt of social violence. If you think we are in the throes of social violence now, you have no idea what is going to hit you in the next 15 to 20 years. Okay, China is a different matter. Their dependency ratio is going to increase massively. They thought that by the time they had actually planned this, I remember attending a seminar in Beijing where this was spoken about sometime in 2007 or 8 May, where they had actually told me that by 2025, we would have hit $20,000 per capita. So even at a 2:1 dependency ratio in 2020, we are going to start 2025, sorry, we are going to start to be able to look after people to a very good level of care. The per capita income today is 10,000. It hasn't reached where the Chinese thought it would reach. So that dependency ratio is going to turn into a huge nightmare for them, because this population is used to a $10,000 standard of living, which they expect after retirement, which they are not going to get, because the prognostication of going to a $20,000 economy has not come true. Per capita income, sorry, not economy. Okay, so there are a whole range of other issues to do there, which is, but see, old people don't go around rebelling. They don't go about killing, they don't go about raping. That is a completely different social trajectory. It is going to be a different kind of social strife. It is not going to be a violent social strife. And remember, when you have a ruthless, brutal government, they will crush any kind of social strife. You know, the demographic change, a lot of the Arab Spring, it had been predicted. If you go back to the Stimson Center report on population, it was released sometime in 2003, 2004, I think. It had predicted that all these countries, Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, there would be significant churn out there. There was. But see, it had predicted a continuing of the churn, which there isn't. Why? Because the regimes have proven extremely brutal with an ability to crush. In India, you're not going to do that. How are you going to deal with it? I don't know.
There are some more questions in the chat box. Maybe I'll just quickly read them and then can give quick replies to them.
Yep.
Harshit is asking about the situation. If there's a situation of aerial conflict in Ladakh, is India prepared for it?
Yes. Look, for 15 to 30 days, we'll do just fine. Because remember, our weakness is the fact that we have to rely on imported weaponry. So your missiles and things like that. For the first 15 to 30 days, boss, you can hold your own against the Chinese. The problem comes if the war stretches. Okay, then it becomes your classic case of the American North versus the American South. This American South had better generals, it had better morale, it had better everything, but the North had much better industrial supply chains. So in spite of incompetence, they won the war.
Siddhant is asking, is there a larger cultural, psychological reason for our hangover with socialism? Even Stalin and Tang, they industrialized.
No, it's not cultural, sociological. It's the way you, it's the way you package things. Okay, nobody here has the guts to say, "Bhai, tu bhikari hai, main tere ko Mukesh Ambani banaunga." They'll keep saying we are pro-poor. What prevents you from starting a campaign saying, "Bhikari, nahi, kya, bhikari to Antilla, my 15-year plan." कोई नहीं बोलता है. But you know, it could be a powerful campaign. The issue is nobody is willing to take that risk. And when they come to power also, they're not willing to take that risk. So that's that. It's not socio-cultural reason at all, in fact. All of these things, what we call socio-cultural reasons behind ideology, they can be reversed very quickly. For example, how communism failed or was thrown away in certain countries.
Sri Datta is asking about the semiconductor industry. China has a monopoly over it. And so what should India do with regards to that?
Look, China's monopoly, there's no need to deal with it directly because, see, China, they have a monopoly over semiconductor rare earths. Rare earths, by the way, aren't very rare, only because they have outpriced everybody else. They've engaged in predatory pricing and outpriced everybody else. The moment they start threatening you, like they did with rare earths, withholding rare earths to Japan, what did Japan do? They went and started up 3 different strategic ventures in 3 different parts of the world to extract their own rare earths. That's it. And they've cut out China from the supply circle. Because their thing is, we don't care now if you bring your prices down, we are going to source our own rare earths. It's that simple. So you find alternatives if and when the price mandates it, and if the threat becomes so much that price becomes irrelevant.
Satvik is saying that he's an engineering graduate and he wants to be part of policy making apparatus of the country. Is there some advice that you can give him?
Do yourself a favor. Don't turn into a negative person like me. Stay positive. तुमको शादी करना है, बच्चे पैदा करने हैं, और बच्चों को अगर अच्छे एनवायरनमेंट में पैदा करना है, you can't be as negative as me. ठीक है ना? Children, and they don't care if you're negative. But if you have kids, you're going to end up becoming very negative. So stay out of policy. But if you want to get into policy, first get into journalism or into a think tank. That's the easy way in.
So Dandani was precisely asking that, why are you so negative?
I'm not negative, I'm realistic. Why don't you, instead of saying I'm so negative, why don't you ask me, why don't you point out which of my facts are wrong? So my question to you is, why are you living in so much delusion? What is the basis for your positivity? Because, you know, hope is not a substitute for reality. Everybody hopes to be Mukesh Ambani. यार मैं शक्ल का इतना घटिया भी नहीं हूँ. मेरा क्यों नहीं ये 5 लाख स्क्वायर फुट का मकान है? मेरा क्यों नहीं प्राइवेट जेट है? मेरा क्यों नहीं फेरारी रोल्स रॉयस है? मेरे में कोई खराबी है क्या? नहीं ना. क्यों नहीं है? I'm realistic, boss. But if you think you are the next Mukesh Ambani, congratulations to you.
Yeah, Siddharth is asking, what is the solution for the demographic nightmare in India?
There is none. Remember, we had planned these things carefully. We never executed them. Nehru had planned the industrialization of India. The problem is he deindustrialized India. Do you know Bengal was a fully industrial state? One of the terrible consequences of that industrialization was the famine, was the Bengal famine. But Bengal was industrialized to the point that Europe was industrialized. Do you understand that? And Nehru brought in an act which was the Spare Parts Act or something like that, where transportation costs were no longer to be factored in. And that completely destroyed the industry of Bengal because it was supplying to every other part of India at that point of time. Nehru did to Bengal what Kim Il-sung did to North Korea, deliberately deindustrialized for the sake of identity politics. So you had an industrial plan which you did not carry out. You had an education plan which you did not carry out. You had a human resources plan which you did not carry out. Nobody understands what the initial impact of that plan was meant to be, and the intent of that plan was meant to be. You've lost direction now, and now it's too late. So there's nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can hope for right now in order to control it is unfortunately harsher laws and a better security apparatus, because it'll have to be crushed.
There are many more questions. If you have time, like I can go through them.
We can go up to 7.
Okay. So Siddhant is asking, can you tell some names of some good think tanks which are not ideologically possessed, from which we can get factual analysis?
No. I'll give you the names of individuals or books where you will get factual analysis. On health, go to ORF's Women Korean. On the Northeast, go to IPCS's Anshuman Chaudhary. और क्या है? On foreign policy, maybe check out Sushant Sareen, especially with regards to neighborhood policy, westwards neighborhood policy. Yeah, those would be the ones. But no, look, have faith in individuals, not in institutions.
Harshit is asking your thoughts on Indian bureaucracy. The UPSC system failed. Should there be some reforms on this? And segregation of the services is good.
देखो भाई, अगर services segregate होते, then there should have been a case that your IFS is the best, because the IFS is a specialist service. They're just as ghunchu as the IAS. And I'm telling you this as the son of 2 IAS officers. Both मेरी माँ और बाप IAS हैं, और घूंचू सर्विस है भाई, मानना तो पड़ेगा, घूंचू है, तो कोई उपाय नहीं है, ठीक है ना? तो what you are actually an undergoverned country. You need more bureaucrats, but you need more accountability. The problem is we have a lot of useless bureaucrats. Why do you need a tea board of India? Why do you need a coffee board of India? Why do you need a salt commission of India? Okay. Why do you even need a textiles ministry of India, boss? So there are a lot of departments you can get rid of and come up with other things. You need more security for the individual. You need more police. You need the police to be accountable. You need the police to be wearing body cameras at all times. You need better legal protections. You need an expansion of the judiciary. And you need more accountability of the judiciary. Okay, so there is a lot of expansion required. There is a lot of specialization required. But remember, specialization without accountability will lead to corruption. The thing is accountability.
Yes, Amit.
Yeah, I was having something similar to what Abhijit you just mentioned now. I have few friends in bureaucracy and especially in foreign services. And I spoke to them regarding the reformation, all was talked about, like lateral entry and things like that. And I talked to them and they were vehemently opposed to that idea. And
Sabko ambassador banna hai na? Everybody wants to become an ambassador. See, for any organization to grow properly, it needs to have a pyramidal structure. At every stage of promotion, 10% needs to be ejected. That is how you come up with an efficient bureaucracy where people are scared they're going to get kicked out. Here, it is a cylinder. Joby, if you are smart, if you are a ghonchu, it doesn't matter. By the end of your career, you will become ambassador. और वो जाके ambassador बन के पता नहीं कितना damage करके आएगा जिस country में posted है. So they won't.
Okay, Shubham, you can take over now.
Yes, sir. We are nearing to the end of the session. So I pay my sincere gratitude to Abhijit sir for coming here and addressing our forum. Indeed, it was an enriching session in which he raised a lot of questions which we certainly need to look at. We'll be organizing many more sessions in the future. I'm also thankful to the audience and participants who took a keen interest in this session. Have a good day. Let's discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great talking to all of you. Thank you.